We'll call a workshop meeting to order. Cliff, you want to go ahead and we're going to get started. We'll do the prayer pledge and the fact of the day at the regular council meeting.
And we're going to do this for the invocation, everything at the regular meeting, right? So I just move on in.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Charter discussion amendment online. All right. So staff was nice enough to put together a PowerPoint for me, which I'm thrilled about. Is it? Okay. And what we did is we have two major parts of it, actually three. One is the draft ordinance as it currently sits, backed up by the actual, what we call the all changes document that has all the various changes in terms of how they would look in their totality. As you know, the ordinance just has a question, a summary, a brief summary, has to be 75 words or less, and then yes or no. So it doesn't give you the whole context of the amendment, but the all changes document will show you with red line, strikeout, or whatever, exactly what the amendment would read. So that's what we're doing. There are, as it currently sits, 5 questions, I think, that we had come up with. No, 6, 6 questions. One of them, which we have discussed a couple of times but haven't actually refined, is where we want to go with the election language, which currently, as I mentioned previously, says December, which nobody does elections in December. And so we were given choices of March or November. And so some direction on that would be helpful, because that would be the last part of the puzzle to finishing the ordinance and bringing it up for first reading. But between the last meeting and this, another part of our presentation today, I got an email from the vice mayor with other changes, some of which we've discussed before, some of which we have not. And if there is any interest in pursuing those further to the point of drafting amendments and changing the ordinance, then I would need to know that so I can then come up with additional questions, change the ordinance to add them. So if none of those make it past today, then this is your ordinance, and I just need to know what to do with the election. If some of those make it through today we want to see more, then I would put them in the ordinance and we go from there. So that's where we're going. The first question is a good place to start because it's the one where I don't have any further feedback, and that is the date for the election and whether or not that should be in November. It should be in March, which is when we're currently conducting them, but we're doing it by virtue of an ordinance that overrides our charter because of the way it's structured, which is an unusual situation, but it is applicable here. And this would get our ordinance back into the charter as this is when we do elections. Because now, if you just weren't aware of the ordinance, like I wasn't coming as your city attorney, and you looked at the charter, you would think, well, what is going on here? And so this would sync up if we change it to whatever date we want in the charter. That means the charter would accurately reflect when we're having elections. So at that, I'm open for questions. We've had the presentations from the supervisor of elections on the issue, but I just need to know which one you want.
Any thoughts on election dates?
See, the November that we were considering is the off year. It's not even the presidential year. It would be Cliff.
Yes.
Okay. And we would be the only ones, the only municipality on this side for the November election. And Orlando is the only other one. And I just recently read something that even with a November election, it still had a very low turnout on the odd year that was not a presidential.
Yeah, that's very possible.
Oh, I'm sorry. There you are. Thank you, Rob. I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
did not hear.
I said, yes, that may be accurate. I didn't look at statistics because for me, it's when do you want it? So I can just write it accordingly. And it's written now as November because that was the thing that I'd heard most recently. But after we heard from the people at the Division of Elections and there's been further discussions and thought, maybe March is what you want. I just need to know what to put in the thing. Doesn't matter to me. If you direct me, and again, I got asked by somebody in the media, I don't remember which one, it was either the chief or the voice, because they both called me about this, was there going to be a vote today? Well, the answer is no, if you got direction, leave this alone, then that tells me it already says November. If you say, well, I think we'd like to see March, then that's what's going to go in for the first reading. And I just need to know which one. And then we'll talk about the other 5 questions on here. But that's the one I really need information to bring it to the first reading as to what you want to see.
Right now, the only input that you are receiving is from the dates. And that's the November date was initiated by a former commissioner.
That's correct.
And even at that time, I had expressed that I felt it was just to leave it for March. I was in agreement where the charter should be corrected to read March, because I didn't realize until you brought it up that we were voting in March elections through an ordinance, but our charter was still showing December.
Correct.
So that was my my recommendation. Now, we've had a new election and we have uh, a new commissioner, and I do believe that when Commissioner Anderson did come on, that I did ask you to please send her as much as you could from the
I did.
charter, so this way she would review and provide her suggestion.
I provided everything that.
I still stand by that. I believe that the election should remain in March,
Okay.
because we would be with all of the other neighboring cities.
If that works, it's easy to change November to March. Uh, it, I'm not really trying to take a poll here, but let me just say this. I'll put it this way. I'm going to put March unless someone tells me to put November. Then we'd have to have some further
But
discussion.
I still would like to have public input to see. I have not received.
There will be public input at the first reading and the second reading. And
Okay.
again, at the first reading, you can make a change again. So if we put in March for the first reading and it's open for public discussion, which it would be, then you can listen to the public and tell you. And I would point out that there has been public discussion at these other times also, but there's just been very little because there's not been a huge amount of interest. The notable exception being Mr. Douglas here to my left, who's been to everything, but most citizens have not attended. I
Right.
don't know whether that's based on schedules or interest or what it is, but with that notable exception, who I know has been here like every meeting, that has not been. It's not that the opportunity's been here. It just hasn't been bringing up a lot of
I mean,
folks.
I'm just one vote up here, right? Just one voice, I should say, up here. So I would like to hear the input by the other commissioners.
Well, let me say that when this was discussed about the November election, the reasoning is that if we move to November, then we have a greater voter turnout, because that was with the assumption it's going to be during the presidential election, and so that would be on the same ballot, but it's not going to be during the presidential election, so that's not a valid reasoning any longer. So I'm comfortable with March as well.
Mr. Nesta?
Commissioner Nesta, and I think that although I understand that what you're saying, we've done it in March for so long, and other municipalities do that as well. Orlando does it for a reason, to stay consistent with, you vote in March. You just know you're voting in March no matter what. You're going to be voting in March. And as the second largest city in Orange County, I think kind of looking to them as, hey, we're growing as well and getting consistency with our residents that we're voting in, or excuse me, November. Everyone, you're voting in November no matter what. We now have a residence. Okay, are we voting in March this year or are we voting in November this year, depending on what election it is? So I look at it, and again, to your point, I don't think there's set data that says you're going to get better turnout this time or this time. My just a thought is that having it in November, everyone knows you're voting in November for something, versus in March, where okay, which are we voting local in March, and then I think, and that, again, that to your point, I don't think there's huge data to say one way or the other way.
Mr. Anderson?
I also think we probably should just keep it in March. I think a lot of the residents are kind of probably gotten used to voting in March. So I'm in agreement to keep it in March as well. So
And I would second or third, fourth that motion. So I think that will just, unless there's a
That's what'll
reason
be
to
a,
do it.
that'll be on the first reading.
Yep.
And then if you have commentary that changes
Yep.
your mind, it's an easy change to make. And on first reading, you can make those kinds of changes. So now
Okay.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to
If
go.
I can ask a question on that, so what happens if we're changing that to March? If the voters say no, we don't want it in March, what happens?
Well, what happens is what's happening now. Because this is a change to the charter, it doesn't change the existing ordinance. If the charter changes where it conflicts with the ordinance, that'd be a different story. But right now, the charter allows for what's happened, which is you had an unworkable date in December, and an ordinance was adopted that has to be renewed to have the elections in March. Because I kept wondering, and I think I reached out to Ms. Bone and said, hey, how is it we're having an election in March when the charter says December? And that's when I found out about this adopted ordinance and that there had actually been done and all the right boxes had been checked, but I didn't know. And so the reason this came up in charter review is because that's not ideal. It should be where anybody looking at the charter can figure out when are the elections going to be. It should not say December and I got to go look for an ordinance to figure out when they actually are. So I was trying to get the two things lined up. And
So
so
this will default to the ordinance.
yes,
Should this
if this
not
fails,
pass.
it'd be right where we are.
Right. Okay. But then our
Then you
charter
could
would
amend
still
your
not line
ordinance.
up properly. Then
Yes, they won't line up, and you because it's your ordinance, you could also amend the ordinance to a different date. Like if the ordinance, which is currently for March, doesn't suit. If you think, well, that was overwhelming turnout, they didn't like March, so maybe we should change it to some other date. Then you can do that by your ordinance. But ultimately, the goal should be to get this in your charter the way you want it to be in your charter.
absolutely. No, yeah, I was just trying to figure out what happens.
If it fails, then everything stays the way it is right now.
But you said that the ordinance needs to be renewed in some capacity.
I forget the details of it, but yeah, as I recall it, it has a part of it that requires it to be renewed, but I don't remember how often. I could be misremembering. I've got a lot of cities have different things, but I think that's accurate for your city.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, so what I was going to do now is I was going to go through each of the questions that aren't the election one and then make sure that there's nothing more to discuss on those. And so we'll start. Now, recognize that all of the questions, however many they ultimately end up being, you will, at the first reading, be able to tell me we do or we don't want to take this to the voters. We like the ordinance exactly the way it is with everything, or let's try question blank, 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 and leave only these questions for whatever reason. That is normal. That is the process. It is up to you. That is not for tonight. Tonight is to figure out what do you want to look at in the first reading, and if there's any tweaks to what you're going to look at, that so I can make sure that's reflected in the ordinance. So the first one is, for example, the council manager form of government. You'll recall we had some substantial discussion on this matter. Right now, unless I get direction otherwise, this will come to you as a part of your ordinance on first reading, and it has been this way for many, many months since I drafted the ordinance. Okay, I don't see anybody staying lean on talk about it, so that's good. Changing the name of governing body from council to commission. This is interesting because I did get a question on this from, I think it was the chief, and they asked me about why that is happening and is it significant. The answer for your recollection is it's not significant. Your charter currently refers to you as both commissioners and council members, and we're trying to get it consistent. Y'all had expressed a preference for commission versus council. So if this passes, that's what you will be, the Apopka City Commission instead of the Apopka City Council, and it will be consistently that way throughout the charter. If it doesn't pass, anticipating the question, the charter stays the way it is right now. Any more comment or discussion about that issue? Okay. Question 3 was the authority of the city clerk in election qualifying. Now, this just codifies in a way that makes it very clear, and will hopefully avoid future debate on the subject, that the city clerk doesn't have authority beyond qualifying someone. If they check the boxes, literally by saying, here's my proof of residency, here's my proof that I've been here for whatever long, or whatever the forms are, the office of city clerk, and this is true in almost every city, doesn't have any investigative power. They don't have any ability to send out law enforcement to run background checks or any of that stuff. So they accept what's filed. And if there is a question, that is something that is taken up by the opposing candidates or citizens who are concerned or whatever. And certainly we got some pushback, but a lot of the pushback came on the clerk who really had nothing that they could do even if they wanted to do, because it's not permitted. And so this simply codifies in your charter that that's the fact.
It's not permitted under what?
Well, because the clerk the clerk has limited authority, and they don't have any authority under your charter to conduct investigations, to do anything other than accept.
So under the charter is that. So we could change a charter to allow those powers to the city clerk, though.
Well, with ramifications, and the ramifications would be now you got to budget a certain amount for the conduct of investigations. You have to figure out how we're going to deal with it from a time perspective, from the time of qualification to one human, the person who sits there, to make a decision. I'm tossing them off, as opposed to the court system, which is designed for that sort of stuff with lawyers on both sides and other things that are problematic. So if you're asking me, could you? The answer is you could. But if you want my advice to whether it's wise or not, probably not wise. The clerk should not be stuck in that position.
Okay.
All right.
I'm just asking questions. I don't need a response from up here. I was asking our attorney a question. Thank you.
All right. So no problem. The fifth is the term limits issue. I'm not sure, but I think that may be something that is also discussed in Ms. Vice Mayor's email. We'll see in a minute. And this is that creates term limits for elected officials. The term limit, as we discussed at the time, would be minimum of 4 years from the date they last served after they were term limited out. This is the way it is currently drafted. I haven't heard any input on it. I assume it's still okay this way for you, but we'll see if it changes when we discuss the Vice Mayor's email. Is there any further one to discuss on this matter? And then the last one.
Well, the question I have is the part about the ineligibility after service, that after they have served their term limit is passed, then they're not eligible to run for any other elected office
In city for 4 years.
For 4 years.
But it's 3 consecutive terms.
Well, I guess my concern is if there was a commissioner that served their 3 4-year terms and then decided they want to then run for mayor, according to this, they have to wait another 4 years before they could do that.
The way it's defined, that's yes. That's yes. And if you want to change that, whether you want to have some discussion and have me modify the ordinance for the first reading, that's fine. If you want to have the first reading and decide to change it there, that's also fine. But that's what we discussed at the time this came up, and we agreed on, at least in terms of to look at it, 3 terms consecutively. We defined what consecutive meant. And for example, it includes any part of the 3rd term, is my recollection. I can get to that actual language, probably get to it now. Let's go to the actual language of the amendment so you can see how it reads.
So, where did we have that discussion with the?
With the term limits?
Yeah.
I'd have to go back and find out which session, but it was one of the several charter review sessions we had. I just don't remember which one. Let's see.
I'm trying to see. Not the way I wrote it.
Okay, no, that's not it. Question 5.
Now, when I sent you the email, I wrote, a city commissioner has 3 full consecutive terms, shall not be precluded from filing to run for the city mayor position.
Yeah, we're going to get your email next. That's coming up.
This is what we already kind of discussed. Yours is something,
Oh,
a new email.
That was new.
Yeah.
New as that was like last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yes,
Correct. Okay.
when I got the email, right. Well, somehow, and it is almost assuredly on me, but the portion where I made the change for the qualifying, I can't seem to find it here in the presentation, but I'll just tell you, and I'll make sure you get it. It was any part of the 3rd term begins service, so you can avoid people rigging the system, so to speak, would count as the 3rd term. What I mean by rigging the system, we've had situations, not going to name the cities, where somebody got to the last week of their term in office and decided to resign so they wouldn't have served consecutive terms so they could run again. And so it provides that any portion of the third term consecutively counts. And then from that point on, you're disqualified for 4 years. And that's the intention of the amendment. And again, we discussed all this. I wish I could remember which session, but I'm sure there's minutes that reflect it. And although for some reason or the other, I can't find it in here, that is what the text of the actual change reads. And so with that, I guess we can go to the discussion of the Vice Mayor's email, because it has some additional things that we haven't discussed. And here, the first one she says is requested any changes or additions, recommended changes. And at page 4, line 162 to 164, request to include, however, should the city clerk become aware of any inaccuracy, the city clerk should notify the commission at the next commission meeting. So this would be a change that doesn't change her ministerial role. It just means that if she has, or she or he, whoever it may be, has any information, which certainly there was a lot of information flying around in the past elections, she can't verify the truth of it, but I assume that the point of this would be to give you all notice to see what you could do. But it's important to recognize, and there may be other changes here that address it, you don't have any authority to do anything either.
Right.
You can't boot them off the ballot either. That's just not the way that works. And so, and with the word inaccuracy, that would mean she'd have to determine whether the information she provided through some source is more accurate than the information she was provided by the candidate, which puts them in a position of having to, again, make decisions that generally are not the role of the clerk. But anyway, this was the discussion. And so that is why I want to make sure you had an opportunity to discuss it, because I'll put in this amendment whatever it is you want.
I just think you're opening up the clerk to things that she doesn't need to be involved in. So I would just say that we don't need to do question 3. But
And I also think doing something like this will also, someone who personally, this came about because when I was running for office and it's information that was circulating around was actually false. So I think once again, putting any clerk in a position to verify accuracy does open the city up for a lawsuit. In addition to that, people can weaponize it when they're running for office and just put documents out there, and then I just don't think it should be.
Well, and I will say this, certainly that's the most recent example, but I know from past elections here that it always seems to happen that information about a candidate or their eligibility seems to come out of every election for whatever reason. And so without judging it, it's not abnormal for people to question somebody's qualifications to hold office. It happens a lot.
But I think it's important to know that the integrity there, if the city clerk does become aware of a concern, that we're all aware of it as well.
I don't think so.
And maybe instead of inaccuracy, because then she's maybe making an opinion, he or she's making an opinion, say inconsistency. So they are not making an opinion on this is inaccurate, this is accurate. It's this is inconsistent. Something's been brought to my attention that's been inconsistent with what was provided to me.
I think that could be weaponized, and I think we should not do it.
It doesn't do anything. There's no other than making sure that it's more transparent that there is an inconsistency that came up.
Well, you have
Again, we don't have the
someone
power
has
to
to determine that, and I think once again the clerk is the one determining that.
No, that it's
she- if the clerk-
it's not inaccuracy. They're not making an opinion or determination on right or wrong, accurate or inaccurate. They're saying if it's an inconsistency, the number 1 was on one form, somebody else gave me the number 2. Those are inconsistent. Board, here's an inconsistency.
I don't
have
think
no
that's a role of a
opinion on
clerk.
it.
That is not a role of a clerk to determine that.
Commissioner Smith, any thoughts?
Well, I'm just trying to see how would the clerk determine whether it was inaccurate or not. Then that means that she would have to do some kind of investigation to determine whether whatever somebody supplied her was inaccurate or not. And I think that when there is some discretion about a particular candidate, all of us receive those emails somehow or another, or we hear in the wind. So I think rather than putting the clerk in a position where now she's got to determine whether it was inconsistent or inaccurate, um, it's like a notary, just notarizing the person's signature. You're not determining whether what's in the document
Right.
is actually true or not.
No, but they do have to confirm that that is the person that's signing. So there is some accuracy to knowing that the person that's signing that document is the one that the ID that they're providing. So I think it's important to have transparency, number one, and number two, making sure that, again, I don't think it should be accuracy. I think it should be inconsistencies, things that don't align with what the document that was provided to qualify is inconsistent with something else that has been provided. They're not taking an opinion. The clerk would not take an opinion on whether it's right or wrong. They're just stating this is inconsistent.
And
That's
they're
provided by who?
The public.
well, the pub, whoever has issue with it, there's certain they can file a lawsuit. The candidate can file a lawsuit. I mean, anybody that has interest in it, there are certain things they can do to file lawsuits.
That is accurate. There is another. I mean, I'll put it however you want, and if you want to see what it might look like, I'll draft something and y'all can look at it and then decide. But what I will tell you is you can also have, and this actually might be a relief to Mrs. Bone, is say that any communication you get, during the election season regarding a candidate is automatically transmitted to all the members of council. So she didn't have any passive judgment. I got an email, here you go. I got a message, here it is. That way I'm not involved in deciding good, bad, because I know from the last election for sure, much of the information was through social media. There was obviously some direct emails and some other communication, but much of the information was through social media, so that if the clerk is not looking at social media, they ain't getting it. So
Then I could agree with that. If she receives information, just forward it to the commissioners.
that's a policy issue that y'all can adopt and make it your own policy.
And
That I can live with.
Sort of like when I'm doing a response to one of you, I blind copy the rest of you per your policy, and I make sure I don't follow it. I violated that one time without knowing. I don't do that anymore.
Which we appreciate you do that consistently now. So I think that's a great idea. Let's move forward with that in that capacity. Exactly what you just described, I think, is perfect.
Okay. Now, the next thing was on here about March, and we've covered that one. The section 3.01, city clerk and city attorney shall be appointed and removed by a majority vote of the city commission. Let me see what the next part of this, with the request to add the ballot choice between two forms of government, the authority of city manager form of government versus current strong mayor form of government, it would be wise to conduct a workshop, provide education on the difference between the forms of governing. So I guess this is a request. Let me go back and see if I've covered the other one properly. I guess there should be a discussion about this appointment and removal of city clerk and city attorney by the majority of the city commission. That's what you want to discuss here?
Right.
Okay, so before I go to the next thing, let's talk about that. Do you want me to put an amendment that does that? It's easy enough to do. I just need to know whether that's what you want me to do.
I'm sorry. Clarify which the city
This is
clerk
at the bottom of her email here. It says section 3.01. Currently, in case you have forgotten, it's not been any controversy of recent memory, the mayor appoints, and then it has to be ratified by a majority of the commission and by unanimous legal opinion, which there were several. To fire, it can be a majority of the commission as long as the majority of the commission includes the mayor. But if it's a majority of the commission without the mayor, based on the way your current charter reads, then that's not going to work. And so this would change all of that. The city clerk and city appointed shall be appointed and removed by. So I assume we would work through it, but the way that would work is you would do an RFP for candidates for the positions or however you wanted to, or candidates would be brought for your discussion if you didn't want to do an RFP because you're not required. That's a policy thing for you all internally. And then you would make a motion to appoint whomever, pick whomever, vote, and that's how it would go. So that's what I think this version would accomplish, and I would come up with the right language to make that happen if that's what you direct me to do.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
That was what was suggested to me, even by some members of the public who thought that was an important issue to address. And obviously, it comes from the previous resignation of the city attorney. And you could remember that there
Oh,
was
I remember.
okay. So that was a topic that was important to the public to get. They felt that they were not their voices were not heard, and because of the way the current city charter reads, it the determination of that employment was based on one person saying to relieve that city attorney of his employment was by only one person, and it was the strong mayor, because that's the way our current charter reads. Although when he was hired to appointed by the mayor, it required the commission to approve it.
Well, I'll only make this correction. The mayor alone could not fire the city attorney then or
Right, I
now.
remember you did go
So
over
it would
that.
also require him to have at least 2 additional votes to fire the city attorney. So I'm trying to keep at least 2 of you happy at all times. Just a joke. Bad joke, but you get the point. So it's not like he can unilaterally fire the city attorney any more than he can unilaterally hire them. But he does have to be one of the votes to fire them.
Right, that's the way the current city charter
Correct.
reads. But again, I'm just presenting something that was important
Sure.
from the
I'm
public.
not judging it. I'm just trying to figure out whether I should write an amendment that accomplishes it. And so that y'all can consider it.
Well, I think this more accurately describes what is needed in that the city clerk should be independent, similar to the city attorney. There should be no loyalties one way or the other. It should be completely independent, give us advice and counsel in whatever way that looks like, regardless of who's asking for it. And I think this helps to clarify that and codify it in the correct way.
I'm going with whatever you'll have me. Just tell me what the draft.
So are you not happy with the way the hiring process?
No, it's not me not happy. I'm just
Well,
putting something out there.
Also, that's
But
not what
a
this is
lot of what
discussing.
a lot of what the
well, yeah.
changes are is a result of past circumstances we've all experienced, and the public was very involved during that time, and this was something that came from that. And you're right, when you had explained it, was the other way around, was that he would not the mayor, the strong mayor, would not be able to terminate the employment of a contract employee without 2 or more votes. Is that correct?
Of those two
Of
contract
2
employees.
votes.
Yes.
So even though the council may have been for terminating, as long as the strong mayor, no, because it had to be a 3-2 vote. So
At least a 3-2.
right. So as long as the strong mayor did not agree with the termination, the contract employee would not be terminated.
Of those 2 contract employees, clerk
Right.
and attorney. Yes.
Right. And it's just concerning the attorney.
And the clerk. It wouldn't apply to Public Works or any of the
No,
other
it
positions.
doesn't apply to
Right.
any of the employees within the city staff.
That's
It'd
correct.
just be the contract
Correct.
employees.
that's not my question. My question is the hiring process okay the way it is? Which is I bring it forward, have to have 3 votes to somebody to be hired.
Sure.
So can
Well,
we
we
leave
haven't
that
hired
alone?
anybody in house
Huh?
for years. We haven't hired anybody in house for years. So
No, the way have been doing it lately has been a committee has been no. Oh, you've been just
No, I bring them forward. I make the what I would like to have is whatever the city clerk or the city attorney. Then if I don't get 3 votes, then they don't become the city attorney or the city clerk,
okay.
which is the same as that's consistent with all the department heads. That the hiring process. I'm fine if you want to do the 3-2 on or majority to a majority will relieve somebody of duty, the clerk and the attorney. That's fine. I think it's consistent on the hiring side. I still have to have 3 votes. I can't unilaterally hire somebody. Never have been able to.
I can draft it either way. Just
well, I think this gives us the opportunity for us to see all that want to apply, all that may be involved, and have our own discussions, not just at the final few, but we can see the bigger net that was cast and make decisions from there
Well,
and have input on that level.
here's an option then. I can draft the language, like what it would look like, the question, the summary, the actual amendment language, and it would be, if y'all decide to put it in, that would be question 7, I guess. Um, and the reason I say if is because if if the council manager form of government were to pass, this would be automatic, because that's what council manager form of government is. There is no more mayoral appointment, because the mayor is simply a commissioner who runs meetings, but that's it. So that would be redundant. But there is a possibility that the council manager form of government does not come in. The strong mayor comes in, but this is a reduction of the strong mayor's power by this specific issue. So I can propose it as this is what it would look like, this is how it would read, and then y'all can tell me in or out at the first reading. And that's fine. So that way you can actually see the language we're talking about, if that suits everybody and allows us to go to the next thing.
Okay,
Okay.
that's fair.
So the next part of the email is what we were discussing before, when I thought it was still related, and that is the request for a some sort of a workshop or public input regarding the council manager form of government versus the throne mayor form of government, and educating the public. I would point out that when we had this discussion during the charter review, it may have been the one that had the most, but that's not saying a whole lot. I don't know that we had a whole lot of people that talked about it. The minutes will reflect if I'm wrong, but I don't recall it one way or the other. And so it is not as if the opportunity to discuss it hasn't happened. But that having been said, public input is always good if you can get them to show up and give you input. So if you want another workshop, that's really now a matter for you all to determine.
I mean, you brought before us the supervisor of elections, letting us know
Correct.
the time periods for voting, putting it on the ballot. But the one thing I feel that has not been discussed has been the city manager form of government. We all know what a strong mayor
Mhm.
form of government is. I mean, this is it.
Sure.
But
Well, in terms of that, if you want me to figure out some speakers that could come, I'm happy to do that, because I represent cities in both. Um, it's funny because there's only 3 cities in Orange County with a strong mayor, and I represent 2 of the 3. I'm still working on Orlando, but we'll see. So I'm very familiar with strong mayor, but it's also true that the other 2 cities that I represent are council manager. And I've been more council manager meetings than I've done anything else. I'm very familiar with how that works. The number one thing you run into there, and you could still run into it here, by the way, the same prohibition exists in your charter here, and that's interference with administration. It's just that instead of it being interference with the mayor and his administration or her administration, it's interference with administration of the city manager, who has a lot more power in those forms of government than in here. Here, the city administrator is sort of the stopgap between the top of the executive chain, the mayor, and staff. And it's basically there to try to carry out where he or she can, without conflicting with his or her ethical and legal obligations, the policies of the mayor, whether it's for the public works department, the police department, or any other department. That's how that works. In a city manager form of government, the city manager is making all those policies, enforcing all those policies. And if you don't like those policies, the only person you get to talk to is the city manager. And so that's the difference between those two. And the arguments for city manager form of council manager form of government are: you have a paid person with a long reputation or good reputation, supposedly, for dealing with personnel issues and employment issues and policy making and a whole lot of other things that go into the job that a daily employee who does this for a living has to do. And I'm not suggesting by any means that that's not exactly what Mr. Smith is doing now. But he doesn't have the same level of authority. He may have the same job description in terms of what he's dealing with, but he doesn't have the same level of authority, because he can't hire and fire unless the mayor says he can, who it is that goes and stays. But he can make recommendations. In the council manager form, you may show up one day to find out the public works director has been fired, and you don't like that, and it's too bad, because the city manager has made that decision. And they have the authority. Your only authority then is to fire the city manager. And so that is really the difference between the two. In a strong mayor form of government, the people have some accountability to the mayor if they don't like what he or she is doing, because they do ultimately have the buck stopping with their chair. But and typically, as is true here, in a strong mayor form of government, the strong mayor gets paid more than the other commissioners because they're doing more work. They're showing up on a daily basis. It's in essence, a full-time job. We're supposed to be, and so that's the two differences. If you said what are the pros and cons, I can make a good case for both of them depending on what you like. And it's funny because in the other town in Eatonville where this came, it's much smaller, but they have a strong mayor, and they thought they were going to go to council. I thought they were too, but then they decided, much along the same lines that some of the discussions we've heard here, this is what we're used to, and we're not really thrilled about making a change, and so let's not. So that's what they ultimately decided after having a lot of discussion about it. But I can bring you white papers that explain. This is what a council manager form of government is. This is what a strong mayor form of government is. These are the pros and cons, and y'all can discuss that. You can have it in your next workshop if you want to have another workshop. But I don't think there's a lot more than I'm saying to you that you're going to learn from that process. You may find out where citizens are on it and what they want. That's certainly possible. But in terms of, I don't think the pros and cons are going to change. They are what they are.
And I have a few questions. When would this form of government, if this is voted upon, the city manager form of government, when would that take place? When would?
It would be a part of the charter. So that's one of the amendments.
Mhm.
And if that were to pass,
Mhm.
then there's a bunch of places in the charter will change, like the part about who hires and fires the city attorney, because it'll become all of you. That'll be one of the changes. And it's reflected in those changes. If that amendment passes, here's all the things that get stricken and here's all the things that get added. It would happen immediately upon the passage of the change in the form of government, subject to whatever period it would time to make the appointment of a city manager and make the transition. So we'd need to provide, and probably would provide, for a transition period.
So at that time, because the mayor salary is healthy because of that, does the salary change as well? I mean, what does that look like?
In the transition period, which we haven't determined what that would be, but in the transition period, it'd be like having someone who's leaving office, and you want to have them train the next person, or at least be able to sit with whoever the new person is going to be. If it's going to be a city manager, here's all the things that you got to do, or here's all the things I've been doing, get them up to speed and so forth. So there's a transitional period that would be required, and whether you did it by continuing the salary or just agreed that during that period the mayor would get an additional stipend to what the commissioners get while he or she is engaged in training, that's how that would go.
Okay, and that's something we would vote on, the salary.
Yeah.
For the mayor. Okay.
Okay. Next up.
All right, I'm trying to see if there's
So are
any-
we adding that in then properly? That's staying in?
Well, this is about a workshop.
Yeah, we're gonna do
That's
a-
already in there. The question is, do you want to
Okay.
have another workshop?
And that I just want to confirm, Vice Mayor, that you do still want the question in there. You're not asking for it to be taken out.
No, I'm not asking it to
Okay.
be taken out.
That okay. Just want to confirm.
So what is wanted here for y'all to discuss whenever you want to is whether you want another workshop. And it says the city attorney and city manager shall be the only employment contract agreement, which I think is true today, except that we have one exception coming up tonight for
Yeah.
the deputy chief, right?
It's
So
a deputy
it's not we're not the only contractual employees, because obviously there's one coming up for potentially the future chief tonight. But this is something you want to discuss. And so do you want that to be the case where only the city and the city manager have contracts?
And we're going to add more. I'm just
No, because
concerned.
we have tonight we have to
Right.
vote on another contract that's not a city attorney or city manager. At the time we wrote this, we only had two.
Okay.
I still think that's important though, because that if you don't put that in there,
Right.
it opens it up to what's happened in the past. So we don't want to repeat the past and hurt our future. So I think that's important to keep in here. And I think it was a good point to have just those two be contractual employees.
Well, what do we do with the police chief then?
But the police chief would have a contract.
I
Right.
don't
So, and I would disagree with that. And the reason why I would disagree because then how do you find good quality candidates that's going to apply for the job if they don't have a contract?
We're doing it right now.
Well, that's a question. I honestly don't know because I've never been in the position of having to hire any of these folks. And I don't know, for example, if police chiefs or, for example, fire chiefs are different than other offices in terms of their expectations. City managers, 100% of the time, work on contracts because they're so volatile in the positions and subject to change that they need a contract for their own protection. City clerks, less so, but it's not. It's not surprising to have a city clerk with a contract. City attorneys, if they're in-house, they are almost always on a contract for the same reason that a city manager would be. And if they're outside counsel, you can fire us anytime you want. I mean, subject in this case, you have the mayor situation, but short of that, we come and go as you want us to. So,
And I think that the nexus for this was that there were contracts given after the fact. I don't, and maybe
That was it.
it wasn't. So I think contracts on the front end, when we hire them, which would take council's approval, we're okay with. It's that if change in administration the last 90 days, all of a sudden, all these contracts get written so that, they're protecting, their people. I think that's what
That's
we're
what
really
happened.
looking for. So it's a little nuanced in that it's not contracts at the front end. It's contracts after they've been hired. So I don't how that would factor in, Cliff. That's what I think. That's what we're looking for. And I'm
well,
perfectly fine with that.
I would say, and again, frankly, Mayor, you and or Mr. Smith would have more knowledge about this, but if there are positions where the people who you want to hire will not come without a contract, then you should put that, at least if you're going to limit it to certain positions, you ought to put that position in there. So if police is one of those, then this list needs to be expanded to include police. But I don't know that. And so the same would be hold the fire chief. If you go to hire the next fire chief and you can't get anybody because you can't do a contract, that could be an issue for you in the future. I'll be gone, but that'll be a problem. And so I just don't know what those positions are. Maybe it would be good to have your city manager or city administrator do some research and say, the industry standard now is for these positions, they come in with contracts. And so we should at least allow those to have contracts because I don't know what they would be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm going back to. I think what we're talking about. I don't think the contracts at the front end are fine. It's contracts after the fact. So if we hire somebody director, which that would be a director level, I don't think we would ever do a contract for somebody under a director level. Hiring them, we could do a contract, but the day after they've been hired, there's no longer a need for a contract.
Well, we have a community development director position that's
Correct.
open now.
Correct.
All right. So
They could. So I bring forward somebody and they want a contract.
mhm.
We could offer up a contract. The city council agrees with the person and the contract, fine. But what I'm saying is I don't think anybody should. I think the intent of this was not to 90 days or 120 days later. Whoa, I need a contract now.
Right. That's what I'm saying right now. If we approve this as is, and only the city attorney and city manager,
right.
then that wipes all those
Right.
other individuals out.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm saying
Or any employment contracts have to be approved by the council.
I think the issue was that contracts were written for employees and the council and the commission was unaware of
Right.
those contracts. Those contracts were never brought before the commission
Right.
for approval.
So-
That
so-
was
Our
the
policy?
issue.
Yeah, so these
It-
initial
uh,
contracts
it's not
do.
who gets a contract, who's gonna not get it. It had to do with contracts were written
right. So
with employees.
That's
with
it.
the chief administrator and the employee, but the commission was never informed of those contracts. And then when there was a change, when an election came and there was a change of elected officials, then all these contracts came before the new commission, and that was the
it
issue.
didn't come before the city council.
No,
Yeah, they
but
didn't.
it was uncovered that
That's why I'm
it
saying it'd
was
be as
con-
simple as saying any
It
employment
didn't come, you're right,
contracts
and I
need to be
correct.
approved by the city
Correct.
council.
I think that Mr. Smith's point is a good one. If the concern is unknown contracts, you can simply have a provision that says no employment contracts can be entered into without approval of the city commission.
That,
Yeah,
That's
that,
easy.
I think
that,
that's it. Yeah,
that's it.
that's what.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm good with that. All right.
Okay, so that one would take us to the last, what I think is the last set of points. Some of these we already talked about, the term limits, which I will get you the language. I don't know how it somehow got omitted here, but I'll get you the term limits language so you'll have that. And the last one was about the mayor being elected for a 4-year term, subject to 3 full consecutive terms. The way it's drafted, whether you're the mayor or the commissioner, the current term limits provision is you can't serve again. And so I had asked at the time, did you want to distinguish? And if you do, this would be a good time to tell me, where you can serve 3 terms as a commissioner, but then run for mayor and serve 3 more terms as the mayor. I have it set up where whichever position you're in, you can only serve 3 terms and then you're sit out for 4. So if you were a commissioner for 3 terms, you'd have to sit out for 4 years before you could run for mayor. That's how it's currently structured. If you want to change that, whether you do it today or at the first reading, it's fine, but that's how it's currently structured. So it wouldn't matter which chair you're in or what position you held. And that is also done that way because of the potentiality that if you change into a council manager form of government, then because then the mayor position is not,
Certainly.
special in that regard. And so if you want to keep it the way it is, that's the way it is. But if you want to say, no, I'd like to be able to serve 3 terms as a commissioner and then run for mayor and have another 3 terms, that's a different amendment, which I can fix. Just need to know which way you want to go.
That way.
The last one?
Yes.
Okay.
3 and 3.
Is everybody on that page or
Mm.
do you want to see the language and figure it out at the first reading?
I would want to
Let's
see
do
the
that one, yeah.
language.
Okay.
And then if we can't, on the contract side of things, we can add in and make sure that not only do we approve the contracts that are coming in, but any type of extensions or any edits or rescission of those have to be approved by us as well.
I can make all that happen.
Thank you.
Well, an extension of a contract is actually a new contract, but yeah, I'll fix that. I'll make sure it's covered. That is all I have, unless you'll have any more questions for me. I guess the thing that's left to be decided is, do you want to take the opportunity to schedule a workshop on the council manager, strong mayor thing or not? But that's up to you to do and then decide on when.
So
I
we do
will-
need it. I'm always open to workshops, but we do need a first and second reading in April, correct?
In order to, if you're going to make the next one, yes.
Then we need to keep up with the timeline that the supervisor of election set for us. Our first April meeting has to have the first reading of these.
To make what election?
To the timeline that the supervisor of election set forth for us. We have to have a first and second reading in April, and by May 1st, we need to be sending them exactly what needs to be on the referendum.
For what date?
I think, if I remember correctly, that's for when they have the first
We're not.
primary elections and whatever. I'll
It
find
was in
out.
like June, July. They said July,
Yes.
I think, for some reason.
Yeah, that's like a deadline for them to get ballots printed or something. But I don't know whether that's for the November
I
or
think
whether that's for, because they have some primaries before the November.
Yeah.
I'll check.
That was for
Okay.
November.
I'll check and see.
That
But
was-
yeah, I do
that
know
was for the
the
November.
deadlines he's talking about
That was for
are
November.
applicable,
Yeah, that was for the November.
but I think that may be for November.
Was
Either
for-
way, we have to get the first and second
Correct.
reading regardless in
Yes.
April. Done.
Mm.
So I'm all about getting workshops. We've got 2 weeks to do it before that, 2.5. So let's get that in there, marketed and done. Well, not really. We got 2 weeks to do that, to then be able to do our first reading. And even after that, we can do a workshop in between those 2 meetings as well to go over that. We have to stick with the deadlines that the supervisor of elections provided to us.
Well, I will ask the council, I mean, would you want to have just someone come and make a presentation as to what a city manager form of government is as opposed to what we currently have, strong.
I don't. You got an
Got
expert
Cliff.
right here. I don't know why we just don't use Cliff, but whatever y'all want to do.
We can use Cliff.
Well, let me ask this question. If
It's not as much for our education, which it may be something in that form of government that I may not be aware of, but it's more for the public.
Can we do it before the council before the council meeting? Because I
For
don't think it's going to
for
take
the
that long.
it's
So
more
I
so that the public has some
Mhm.
more information on a city manager form of government.
so I'm accustomed to whenever we have these ballot initiatives that there's a for and against statement. You know, a
Can
half
you
sheet,
speak a
full
little
sheet.
louder?
There usually you have a for and against statement that's written not by anybody here, nobody that would have a part of it. A for and against on ballot initiatives, and in this case, it would be one for that form of government or against that form of government.
Yeah, unfortunately, Florida doesn't have
We
that,
don't do that here.
and so you would know that. I mean, that's the problem. If it would make it easier, it's not allowed.
Oh, it's not allowed. Okay,
So in Florida, you have
never
literally
mind.
what you see in front of you in the ordinance with the ballot title, the explanation, and the proposal of yes or no. That's all you get. That's what you see in the booth, and there's nothing else. And also, which makes it worse, I guess, in certain ways, is there's a specific prohibition on the government spending any money in support of any candidate or any issue. And so while you could put out factual information, here's what the ballot says, and here's a copy of how it reads. You can't say good idea or bad idea, and here are the reasons for anything, candidates, issues, or whatever. It's a specific statute that keeps us from doing that. So in that regard, workshops are helpful if you were going to have more, if you wanted more, because it really is, from a governmental standpoint, the only opportunity for you to have information get out there where there can be not necessarily uh, anybody advocating, but people discussing amongst yourselves why you think one is good or the other, and the public can hear it. You can hear from the public saying why they think one is other is good, because once it's been put on the ballot and you all decide that it's on, that's the end of that type of discussion, at least as a government. Individually, you can do whatever you want. You can say, I'm for it, I'm against it, and here's why. But the government can't say any of that.
So why don't we do a workshop before each meeting, the 2nd and the 16th in April? And Commissioner Velasquez, did you have somebody in mind that would present for this, or it was just an idea?
Well, it was an idea.
Okay, I didn't know if you had somebody specific. I think it's a great
No,
idea.
it was an idea that was expressed to me, and then I agreed with it because even myself, I've always dealt with a strong mayor form of government, and the one setback that I have with a city manager form of government is that the city manager is not elected, but has as much power as a strong mayor, and a city manager cannot be removed through the public. That it has to be through a commission.
Yeah. And I will say, having seen both of these things play out, either form of government is capable of train wrecks. I can give you examples. I won't give them publicly, but if you want to know some train wrecks on city manager side, just give me a call. And if you want to know some train wrecks on strong mayor side, just give me a call. And in all of these forms of government, the thing that makes them work is the people who are in the positions. That's it.
Well, let me ask. I think the idea of changing to a manager commission form of government was in reference to the hiring and the firing process. So if we are going to put the ordinance in about this council would do the hiring and the firing or approve it, then is there really still any need to even put the idea of the strong mayor on the ballot, since that was the reason
That's a
for it?
valid discussion point. That's a valid discussion point. However y'all decide that one, that I know was the impetus, at least part of the impetus for it. It may not have been the sole impetus, and so this is sort of it's a check on the full authority of a strong mayor, but it's without changing everything about the way you do business. And if that's a compromise y'all are good with, then that's what the voters go with. Ultimately, remember, this is not about what you decide; it's what they decide. But y'all get to decide what gets in front of them, and that's why this is important.
And I think it's important that we do keep that on the ballot. Let the residents decide how they'd like to be led. I think that's very important. And there was an email that came out today that expressed concern over a strong mayor form of government as well. So, from somebody up on the dais as well. So that I think is important that we put that to the voters to decide. I think it's very important. That's something that almost every conversation I've had, it's been specifically about that. There's been ancillary items that we've discussed, but that has been the main one for this and the drive to get a charter change. So let the residents decide, and then we don't have to discuss it anymore.
Well, y'all are on the workshop issue, so I'm going to take a seat. When you figure out whether there's workshop, I'll know where I'm supposed to be.
Okay.
All right. Any other thoughts? Not,
Well, are we doing a workshop the 2nd and the 16th? Yes, no, and then they
why
need
don't we
to
just
be
bring that. We'll bring that forward at the city council meeting.
Sure.
okay. But then we do need to have.
We'll bring it forward to city council meeting.
Well, please don't interrupt me. We're gonna have then on the 2nd and the 16th the first and second readings, correct?
I didn't say that.
So you're not going to stick to the plan that
I don't know that. I don't remember that being the date. So I want to get that confirmed with.
it is the dates. Commissioner or City Clerk, do you remember the dates in the email from the supervisor of elections?
Is this part of the? I mean, I have all the
I have
paperwork.
to refresh myself, but I know that he spoke about a couple of different options for us. So I'd have to, off the top of my head, I know there was a May date and then there was another date for July.
So this was the printout that we had received
Okay, I
regarding.
don't have it in front of me.
Yeah.
It's on there.
Right, but it I think it was referencing more if the council, if the commission had decided that
For
November.
I have the email
I-
right
that's
here.
what I
It was
have
from
right.
Thursday, February 6th, 2025 at 8:59 a.m. from Scott Hottenstein of the supervisor of elections office. He specifically stated, our chief elections administrator ran some more cost numbers yesterday afternoon. These are better estimates, but not final yet. Mail-only election, approximately $180,000. In-person election with 2 polling places, approximately $15,000. Our preferred timeline would be to hold the election mid-July, so election would be mid-July, with a referendum and ballot language approved by May 1st. So, we need to have a first and second reading in April to be able to keep the timeline that the supervisor of election gave to us. So that's why we've been doing these meetings. That's what the voters are asking for, and they've offered to it. And we've already budgeted for it as well, haven't we?
We have.
Correct. So this is already budgeted as well. So it's in the budget. We have everything done. Attorney Shepard's office has written up everything as well, just some small edits, and we can have this ready and first and second readings in April, as has been discussed and as the supervisor election stated. So that needs to happen.
All right. With that, we'll take about a 5-minute.
We need public comment.
You actually don't on a workshop.
We advertise it that way.
Okay, I didn't know. I'm just telling you.
Okay. All right. Come on down. Who needs to speak?
Leroy Bell, Apopka. Man, this is a dog and pony show. For number one, it seems that everybody is worried about themselves. We already got the career politician, especially when it come down to this term limits. This mayor did 2 terms up there in Tallahassee. He can't go back up there. He can't wait and go back up there 40 years later. We got another career politician sitting in the wings to come in. For what? To get vested in the city so they can get paid. That make no sense. You do 2 terms, get out of here. Secondly, about the clerk of the court. I mean the clerk of the city. Here it is. When you go in, I ran twice. When you go in, you got an application, you got to fill out. Every last one of y'all did the same thing. Why do we need a clerk if she ain't able to distinguish between a lie and the truth? Especially when you got somebody stacking the diocese. when you got people stacking the dices, when you're turning people from getting people to change over from Democrat to Republican just to satisfy, just to codify whatever he needs up here, or anybody sitting in the middle of the seat. That makes no sense at all. Number three, I heard the city attorney say, oh, we got 6 items on this discussion. He said, well, actually, we can add the other one as number 7. As a citizen, we need to add 2 more. And the 2 that we need to add in to make sure that at some point in time, that our charter say that we, the citizen, can have an audit, a forensic audit, especially when 5-0 already have voted that we could have a city audit. Until when you bring in one of your stacked people to vote against it, didn't have anything to do with it. When one commissioner set up in a prior meeting and said, oh, I wasn't on the commission, so I recused myself. I'm not going to vote on that. And then turn around the very next commission meeting and say, well, I don't see where we need an audit. I don't want to spend no money on no audit. But guess what? The citizen want the audit. You guys sitting up there making it pleasant for yourselves, trying to make it so you can cut it, so you can get yourself vested, to get a pension off of the back of the people that you're robbing already. It makes no sense. And you set up there with no shame, none whatsoever. You set up there to ride roughshod over the people. You're already draining them to death with all these hikes and stuff and turning right back around. Every meeting we come in here, you want to amend this budget when you already just set the budget. It needs to be, we need term limits. We need you to do your time. Either you're going to run for mayor or you're going to run for commissioner. One of the two. We need to put some power in there for her to make sure people don't come up and lie like they did. And you say, no, yes, we did. They did have from the Orange County Court. Orange County Court gave up papers saying that it was a lie.
Dr. O, um, I had trouble hearing, but there's no microphones being heard in here because y'all are, your microphones need to be extended completely to you. Maybe y'all can get some extension rods, but sitting in here, there's no speakers coming out. And IT is asked to put speakers in the back of the room, and they were denied so that the citizens can't hear what's going on in here. I was just told, I just asked, and we need to be able to hear. But I could hear nothing coming out of that, the speakers at all. Um, we only heard from your voices. I would like to say that, you know, in the question of should we have 2 questions, um, do we want a mayor form of government or do we want a city manager form of government? When you ask, do you want a city manager form of government, yes or no, that is saying we do or we do not want a mayor. So all you have to do is ask one question, yes or no. If they vote no, that means they want a mayoral form of government. You do not need 2 questions because if they answer both questions, they could reverse their own and cancel out their own answer if they don't answer correctly. It's like asking, do you want President Trump or President Biden on 2 separate questions? And they answer it wrong. No, I don't want Trump, and no, I don't want Biden. Well, then who gets to be president? So I highly suggest you only ask the one question. And that happens in testing all the time. Is if you ask a stupid question, then you get a stupid answer or no answer at all. So let's think that through.
Thank you
And
for that
and
suggestion.
I have been reporting the speaker and microphone problem a long time, but if y'all are going to sit back and be relaxed instead of hurting yourself speaking, then you need to get an extended mic from your because you've got your
Thank you.
computers there at a distance so you can read properly.
Mayor and Commissioners, I want to take a moment, and I try not to get up here and say anything. I try not to come to these meetings, but I do want to really appeal to all of you all, and I always try to show up to these. And as Attorney Shepard said, sometimes it's just not convenient for the residents to come and voice. And when we do workshops, a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to appeal to you. And so I'm glad that it was mistakenly on the agenda, or whatever, because my appeal to you all is to slow down. I said this the last time I was here. Commissioner Smith asked three different questions. What if, what if, what if? The attorney gave us a lot of what ifs. And I think for me, it's sensible to say we're really not ready to rush to meet a deadline of any uh, voting people, because a lot of what I heard, you all got more experience than I do, is we want to make sure we put this in there to guard against a strong mayor having this much authority. And then the attorney say, but if you go to a manager, it doesn't matter. One of the things that was said that I would ask if the commission on the hiring and firing, if you go to a manager, and this may be for the attorney, maybe you can answer, maybe not. If you go to a management form of government, from what I've seen, the mayor's position become somewhat ceremonial. He's just as equal to the rest of you all, but you don't want the mayor to have a vote. That don't make sense to me. He would have to have a vote just as much as you are. But so that tells me right there, we're not really ready. I really, really ask you all to make a decision to have a detailed workshop on these issues, not that 60 minutes where, and that may be all it takes, but to really, really know what we're getting into. And my grandmother used to say, we don't want to cut off our nose to spite our face. And sometimes we have to be careful what we're doing because we want to handcuff one position, and then you beat unbought the bear in the room and you can't get rid of him. And I think Commissioner Velasquez was alluding to that. Then the last thing I would say, I personally think it would be so unfair that you all would push for a term limit, be it 2 term, as Mr. Bell said, or 3 terms, as you all suggesting without strong consideration, because I really think it's hilarious that nobody feels on this council that you're ready for districts, but you feel like you ought to have a term limit. Apopka is grown. You all have approved annexations that are really wacky. And this, I got to go back to it because it amazed me how this becomes a priority for the charter review, but nobody said nothing about that annexation we've been talking about. That I really think that's hilarious. So if we're going to talk about that, we really need to have a workshop and look at the whole picture. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening, Sylvester Hall, Apopka. One of the things I mentioned about the charter before is that we brought in a consultant to examine whether the mayor was getting paid accordingly. And that consultant, I don't know, I can't remember how much we paid, 225, 30,000, $35,000. That consultant completed that all the other positions we had in the city of Apopka was in excellent condition. And we know that's not the truth from the budget and different meetings. Most of the departments are understaffed, and they come in every day and they react to what's going on. They can't be proactive. So when I look at what we're doing as a whole, and so many times I had said when people come to do a presentation to you guys, and if you don't have any background knowledge, if an electrician come up here and try to tell you guys about selling some electrical, you don't have no electrical background, it kind of puts you at a disadvantage. So we talked about consulting, and the mayor said, hey, well, look, we have our own consultant, but they're missing in action most of the time. So my thing was, if for the commissioners to go out and do their job, because I know if I was a commissioner, everything that comes up in that packet, that agenda, I want to go out and I want to put my eyes on it. When these communities are talking about you coming in, you're doing development, how you leave their properties with floods and this and that, who goes out to the site and really get in detail and say, hey, look, this is what we need, this is what we don't need. That takes a lot of time. If you're going to be due diligent for the citizen, that takes time. And so I brought this up before. If the mayor deserves $150,000 a year, I think the commissioner should get a stipend of $75,000 a year. I would like to see that put on the list, and I'd like the people to vote for it because we get what we pay for. And a lot of times when you come here, whatever's being covered, you just get the information the moment you sit down, or you find out about the information on social media. So how can you be working in our best interest when you're not informed and you're not engaged? So that's one of the things I think we should put on the list. The other thing is, just like we have rules and regulation for everything, we should have in that charter a complete step by step. How do we recall any of you sitting up there? If you come up here and you don't do the job that you was elected to do, that should be in a charter step by step, just like we got everything else. I would like to see that put in there. The other thing is public comment. Public comment should not be an option. Or should not be at the discretion of the mayor. And then shame on commissioners that give the mayor the authority to go and change the minutes, dictate them the way he wants them to read. Shame. That should be put in there that should never happen, period. The mayor shouldn't have the authority to go back and change the minutes to dictate it the way he wanted the outcome to be. Shouldn't happen, period. And the other thing, it should be in a charter when somebody up here lies to the people or lies to the panel, there need to be some repercussion for that. That need to be in the charter, the course of action. Because if we can't trust our elected officials to tell us the truth, we got a problem. We got an integrity problem. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Rod Olson, Mayor, Commissioners. Whether we go mayor or strong manager, I think we need to try it at all purposes, remove all the personalities, people and positions, and look at like-sized cities in a growing mode that we are, what works best, what doesn't work best, and take a good look at that. As to term limits, 2 terms is long enough for me. The at-will or contract employer, I served 20 years in HR, another 25 years in senior level management and multi-facility healthcare facilities. That changed every year. What was a contract position before is no longer a contract position. What was not a contract position is. It depends upon the competition. You need to have flexibility in doing that. And that should be a group decision. As far as the city, the clerk, the fire chief, police chief, finance director, city manager, and attorney should be a commission decision, a commission group decision. As to public comment, I would ask you to mirror what our Transmac committee does, and I'm serving on Orange County right now. First item on the agenda after the pledge is public comment. We put you in your seats. The last item on our agenda is public comment. We need to mirror that. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we're going to shut this one down. We'll be back.